I'm trying to see what your wish gonna be like. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear legend. Happy birthday to you.
I heard I made you all that pain, but I'm mature. And I hate I never really made you feel secure. Girl, you know I want to make it way and feel one good. And I hate the fact that you were better when you should. Oh, it's you. What's on the mind? I heard love is blind. True love hard to find. Is you gon' hold me down? I do anything for you just to keep you smiling. Now you know you get what you love way better with diamonds.
On January 7, 2026, North St. Louis County, Missouri, the 10800 block of Glengarry Road sits inside a residential stretch where activity usually follows a familiar pattern. Cars return home in the late afternoon. Porch lights come on as daylight fades. The environment is routine, structured, and largely uneventful. That afternoon, something interrupted it. Shortly before 5 o'clock, police were dispatched to the area following a report described only as a suspicious situation. The wording was vague. There was no indication of what officers would find, only that something required immediate attention. When they arrived, they found a man lying on the street. He was identified as Jonathan Brown, 34 years old. Also known as John, a St. Louis barber, father of 3, whose life ended after his 15-year-old son lost it not long after his expensive birthday party. Emergency responders confirmed he had been shot. He was pronounced dead at the scene. In the early hours after the discovery, information was limited. For investigators, it marked the beginning of a careful reconstruction. Every moment mattered. Every statement would need verification. Within days, the case took a turn that few expected. A 15-year-old male was arrested in connection with Jonathan Brown's death. Because the suspect was a minor, authorities released little additional information. No motive was announced. No explanation of the relationship between the two was provided. The public was left with facts, and silence between them. An adult man, dead on a residential street. A teenager now at the center of a homicide case. A neighborhood trying to understand how an ordinary afternoon ended this way. At first, the timeline appeared straightforward. But as investigators continued their work, certain elements did not align neatly. Statements differed. The sequence of events remained incomplete. Each confirmed detail raised another question. Who was Jonathan Brown in the hours before police arrived? Why was he on Glengarry Road that afternoon? And what led to a moment that ended his life? This case would move forward through official channels, methodically, cautiously, and largely out of public view. What is known comes from verified reports. What remains unknown carries equal weight. This documentary follows the confirmed facts, the investigation, and the unanswered questions surrounding the death of Jonathan Brown. And before we continue, if you want real stories told carefully without speculation and grounded in verified information, kindly subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it so these cases reach a wider audience. Now we return to January 7th, and the first hours of an investigation that had only just begun. By the time officers secured the 10800 block of Glengarry Road, daylight was already fading. The scene was contained, marked clearly, and approached with caution. Patrol units established a perimeter while detectives were notified and dispatched. Jonathan Brown had been pronounced dead at the location. From that moment forward, the focus shifted from emergency response to documentation and analysis. Investigators began recording the condition of the scene as it was found, noting positions, distances, and environmental factors that could later help clarify what had occurred. Residents along the street were asked to remain inside their homes. Some watched from windows. Others gathered at a distance, trying to understand why police presence had intensified so quickly. For many, the transition from an ordinary afternoon to an active crime scene was difficult to process. Detectives from the St. Louis County Bureau of Crimes Against Persons arrived and assumed control. Their role was specific: determine how Jonathan Brown had died, identify who was responsible, and establish a sequence of events supported by evidence rather than assumption. The area was canvassed. Investigators spoke with nearby residents, documenting what they had seen or heard earlier that day. Some accounts were brief. Others were uncertain. A few overlapped in time but differed in detail. Each statement was logged, not weighed in isolation, but as part of a larger evidentiary framework. No immediate public statement explained what led to the shooting. Authorities confirmed only what they could verify: the identity of the victim, the location, the time frame, and the classification of the death as a homicide. As night settled in, the scene remained active. Evidence technicians worked carefully, aware that even small details could later become significant. The process was deliberate. Nothing was rushed. Every step followed established protocol. At this stage, investigators were not constructing conclusions. They were collecting facts. And as the first day came to an end, the case remained open with more questions than answers. Jonathan Brown was 34 years old at the time of his death. Local news identified him as a resident of the same block where he was found, the 10800 block of Glengarry Road in St. Louis, Missouri.
In St. Louis, Missouri, speaking about a man who got a second chance at life after doing a short time behind bars. And now 34-year-old Jonathan Brown got out of jail in January of 2025, and from the moment he hit the ground, he took off running. He made sure that everything he did had purpose, and his main purpose in life was being a great father. Besides his freedom, nothing meant more to him in the world than being there for his 3 boys. And over the past year that he's been out of jail, he made sure he put them first in every aspect of his life. Sadly, all of Jonathan's hopes and dreams were short-lived. After only 1 year out of jail, he would be tragically found unalive in his home after a welfare check, leaving loved ones to try to comprehend who would do something so horrible to somebody who was so loved. Jonathan Brown was a person that if you met him, he always had the biggest smile on his face, and he had this energy that was said to be unmatched. He loved life, and he lived his life to the fullest, and he made a promise to his children that he would always be there and be their biggest supporter. Across Jonathan's social media, it wasn't uncommon to see him speak about being outside of those walls and doing the right thing in life. He would state, "When I say the Lord is a blessing in my life, been home 197 days, own house, own job, I'm at peace, own everything. Lord, I get on here to thank you for always having my back. Just want to thank you for everything you've been doing for me. All I want is to be a great father to my boys and teach them morals and to be spiritual, because without God, I'm nothing. There is nothing I haven't been through that I cannot prevent them from going through what I went through because I lived it. Got my own everything, all bills in my name after 4 years and 10 months locked up. I stay in my house and all my bills are zero. Thank you to Almighty God, but thank you, Lord." And that was just one of his many posts speaking about his excitement, being in the free world, and he wanted others to see that there is purpose after being locked up. Jonathan realized that having a different mindset to do something positive in his life was going to set him up for success. And he wanted his boys to be able to have someone to look up to do the right thing themselves. If he was not in the barbershop cutting hair, he enjoyed spending his free time hanging and making new memories with his boys, especially his oldest son, who recently just turned 15 in December of 2025. When Jonathan first started his bid, his oldest son was around 9 years of age, and by the time he got out, his son had just turned 14. Now, even though 4 to 5 years is not that long to be away, it's a long time when you have young children under the age of 18 who need you to nurture and guide them. Now, during the time that Jonathan was away, his oldest boy we've been speaking about, whose name is Legend, would get himself caught up, living the wrong way and doing the wrong things. And at the age of 13, he even would make news himself, being a part of a trio who did an armed carjacking. Now, even though the news article did not give the names of who were involved because they're juveniles, here's the photo they put out, and the person in the middle is said to be Legend. According to the news article, it stated that Berkeley police were asking for the public's help identifying 3 suspects in an armed carjacking. The Berkeley Police Department opened an investigation on a Saturday at around 3 p.m. after a 2014 Mercedes E350 was carjacked from the 6400 block of Evergreen Boulevard. Police said there were 3 suspects that were captured on surveillance tape, and one of them was armed with a dark brown semi-automatic pistol. The group ordered a man out of the Mercedes at gunpoint and drove away in the vehicle. Ultimately, the 3 suspects were caught, but what punishment they received is unknown.
While much of Jonathan's private life remains out of public record, what we do know paints the picture of a local man whose presence in the community was familiar enough that his death drew immediate police attention and a full homicide investigation. Those details have not been part of official police statements. In many local cases, investigators release personal background only later in community statements or during court proceedings. As of now, those details have not been made public. So while our understanding of Jonathan's life beyond his connection to this incident is limited, his identity as a 34-year-old man from this neighborhood is confirmed. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early January when police were dispatched to the 10800 block of Glengarry Road. Officers responded to what was initially described as a suspicious situation, a call that meant something was not right, but did not yet seem to involve the most serious crime. When they arrived at the scene, they found Jonathan Brown with at least one gunshot wound. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. The area was immediately secured, and detectives began an active investigation. This was no ordinary call. Detectives from the St. Louis County Bureau of Crimes Against Persons took over the case, a unit dedicated to investigating violent deaths. From the outset, police treated the incident as a homicide, meaning they believed it was the result of actions taken by another person. Once the scene was secured, detectives worked to collect evidence, witness accounts, and any physical clues that might help them understand what happened. In cases like this, investigators typically canvass the neighborhood, interview residents, review nearby surveillance footage, and search for any information that might shed light on the sequence of events prior to the shooting. But in this instance, police did not immediately release a detailed timeline of events leading up to the incident. What is known is that the investigation remained active through the next several days, as detectives worked to identify and locate potential suspects. On January 11, 2026, just 4 days after the homicide, authorities announced a major development. A 15-year-old male had been arrested in connection with Jonathan Brown's death and was taken into custody by police. The young suspect was remanded to St. Louis County Family Court on charges of second-degree murder and armed criminal action. Because he is a minor, his name and many personal details have not been publicly released. This arrest marked a crucial turning point in the investigation. Detectives believed they had identified the individual responsible for Brown's death, and the case shifted from an active search to one focused on evidence collection and building a legal case. Even with the arrest, many questions remain unanswered. Investigators have not publicly released details about how Jonathan and the teen knew each other, what led to the conflicting circumstances that preceded the shooting. Unlike some cases where law enforcement shares a sequence of events, this investigation has remained tightly managed without a published motive or clear narrative of what happened before the fatal shooting. In cases involving juveniles, courts often limit release of identifying details and specific statements about motive until charges are formally filed or proceedings begin. A loss like this reverberates beyond the investigation itself. Family, friends, and community members are left to process what has happened. While news outlets have focused on the facts of the case and the arrest, the emotional impact on those who knew Jonathan Brown is largely private and not part of official reporting. Detectives continue to urge anyone with additional information to contact investigators or submit tips through Crime Stoppers, showing that even in cases with arrests, collaboration between community and law enforcement remains an important part of ensuring clarity and resolution. Jonathan Brown was 34 years old. His life was part of a community, a street, a family. On January 7, 2026, he was found with a fatal injury along Glengarry Road. Within days, a young suspect was taken into custody. But many pieces of this story remain incomplete, held in investigative files, family memories, and the unanswered spaces between what we know and what we do not. This is not just the story of a homicide investigation. It is a reminder of how a single moment can ripple through lives and a community. As the legal process moves forward, the full details may come to light. Until then, this remains a story with facts firmly established, and questions left to be answered.